This recorded.
Welcome to Trauma Training Tuesday, everybody. We're so grateful that you are here. I'm Amy Evison at Worcester Addresses Childhood Trauma, and I'm joined by my beautiful and amazing partner at Worcester Addresses Childhood Trauma, Kelsey Hopkins. And we have been doing real intentional deep dive looks at trauma and at traumatic experiences for like more than 5 years now. And it's not lost on me the courage that it takes to do that. Many of us show up for Trauma Training Tuesday because we have been impacted by traumatic experiences. And so not only is this an educational exercise, this is about our lives and our who we are, our identity, our feelings, all of this. And Jennifer, we are so grateful to you for being here, for being in Worcester. Oh, there we go. For being in Worcester, for leading the Worcester Educational Collaborative, for the work you've done on your dissertation, the book you wrote. It's I was saying to Jennifer before everyone jumped on that, like, trauma is what I spend the most amount of time looking at and thinking about the impacts of it. And it's for me like eye-opening and mind expanding to just think about what this looks like at school, like what it means for people who've experienced trauma and particularly the trauma of sexual abuse to go to school and show up at school and learn and develop a sense of self and a sense of agency. And it's also not lost on me that it takes so much to not get stuck, to not be pulled down by the weight of trauma and its impact in your life, and what it's clearly taken Jennifer to not only survive it but like rise to the top of our community to be a leader is phenomenal. And so we are thrilled to have her, and she is throwing out the slide deck and recognizing that she knows what she knows, and she has and we're here to hear from her and her wisdom. And thank you, Jennifer. I will be quiet now. I'm so grateful and excited because you're a hero.
Thank you so much for that intro, Amy. And thank you, everyone, for having me. This is my second time at Trauma Training Tuesday, so I'm so honored to be here with you again. As Amy shared, she and I were chatting just about some things that are happening in current events, and some comments and statements that have been made, and how those statements really can kind of signal to the rest of our country our acceptance and condoning of harm and violence towards children, women in particular. And so I'd like to start off by sharing, if we could put up the slide deck just for a moment, just so folks have some context of what we talked about during part one. And then I'm happy to make the slides available to everyone after this chat. But in our first session, we and you can pretty Amy or Kelsey, I'm not sure which one of you is our DJ, but you could just kind of flip through quickly just to give folks a sense of what we discussed. Thank you. So I introduced myself. I'm Jennifer Itas Herring. I am the executive director of Worcester Education Collaborative. I am a career educator. I've been teaching for about 14 years now. I've taught in multiple urban districts. as well as was a vice principal and then worked at the central office level. So I've pretty much done every role in the school system. When I heard about the opportunity at WEC, I was excited to still work within the ecosystem of education, but taking a step back from the school district itself and really think more broadly about what it takes to really support students and to support the adults who are responsible for their learning and making sure it happens in a safe and supportive environment. So at the last training, we just talked about what the impact of trauma is on student learning, how it impacts the brain, how it impacts just the ability to engage in academic activities. We also talked about intergenerational trauma and how trauma is passed down. There's literal research now that talks about specific genes that are trauma indicators that are passed down from one generation to the next. And then we went into historical trauma, thinking about subgroups and cultural groups of people that have passed down certain trauma traits, such as transatlantic slavery, the Holocaust, even COVID-19, and how it literally shifts our brain makeup and just our genetics. We also talked a little bit about epigenetics, which talks really about the nature versus nurture conversation. What are the ways to mitigate trauma? And are those mitigation strategies more genetic and biological, or are they environmental, or are they both? I personally believe that the environment impacts genetics and the biology of how our bodies and our brains respond to trauma, and there's research to back that as well. And so we just had some really deep conversation about our own personal experiences. And what it means to be a trauma survivor, which at this point is everyone, and what it means to be a trauma survivor and engaging in academic discourse, and how trauma impacts language centers, which directly impact an individual's ability to engage in academically in general. So then we left with these few questions. What does it mean to feel safe in school? How do we support students? And then what systems and infrastructures can be put in place to further the safe and supportive learning environment? And so my plan today was to really extend the conversation of how our genetic makeup and our intergenerational experiences impact how we see the world and how students show up in school, and then what that means for um, their future opportunities and trajectory. I also would like to take some time to really kind of reflect on what is happening today, currently, especially considering coming out on the other side of a government shutdown, the longest one in our history, and what that means for us as trauma experts and support people who support folks who've experienced trauma. Um, Thank you so much. We can stop the share now. Thank you. So I think this is a different set of folks that are here than from the first session. So I'll briefly tell my story and then we'll go into some discussion. So I was I was born in Boston, raised in Providence, came to Massachusetts as a teenager when I had disclosed abuse to my mom. So when I disclosed the abuse to my mom, we immediately left our home. And we actually ended up living in multiple domestic violence shelters as I was growing up. Actually, the first domestic violence shelter that we lived in when I was a child was actually my first job out of college. So that was a really cool full circle moment for me. And in addition to working there, I also worked in a human trafficking prevention program for girls in the city of Boston. And so it was through that work that I realized that I really wanted to become an educator. I share this story all the time, that when I was supporting one of the girls on my caseload, we hadn't seen her in weeks, and we were trying to figure out where she could have gone. And, you know, a lot of the girls that we were supporting at the time were heavily involved in gangs, were living with pimps, and did a lot of illegal sex work. And so we were just trying to put the pieces together to figure out where she could have gone. And so I met with the guidance counselor, and I asked her, "Do you know where this student could have gone? We're trying to locate her. We're calling home. We're calling friends and family. Nobody has seen her." And the guidance counselor asks me if I had seen the video that surfaced of her. And she's like, "We haven't seen her, but I mean, there's a video." And I'm like, "Okay, like, I have not seen the video." And she was like, "Yeah, it was with her and a bunch of guys in her class." And I'm like, "Oh," and I kind of had a concerned look on my face, of course. And the guidance counselor says to me, "Oh, no, no, I wouldn't worry about it. Don't worry. If you watch the video and you look at her facial expressions, you can tell she was enjoying it." And so that is what piqued my interest in becoming an educator. I was already doing youth work. I did a lot of community-based work with youth, during my college years, and right after college, as I said. But that really made me interested in working in the classroom as an educator. At the same time, I was in my first year of my doctoral program, um, and really thinking about the achievement gap. We called it the achievement gap at the time. Now it's the opportunity gap. But it really made me think about, wow, the gaps or the lack of opportunity that we're seeing go far beyond just the classroom. And so that's when I started my career as an educator, and I've been in education ever since. And so in my time in schools and just my time in engaging in community, um, I've been able to observe what environmental factors, as we talked about epigenetics, right? What environmental factors are set in place in our oldest systems, such as faith-based organizations, schools, businesses, the family structure. Um, and thinking about how those environments and those infrastructures kind of set people up to be at risk for harm in many cases, not all. But if you look back at the slides, we talk about how one of the biggest impacts of trauma is language centers in the brain. And I don't know about you, but when I go through something really traumatic and harmful, I can't find the words, right? I kind of clam up, and I get mad at myself now in hindsight, thinking back on things I've even experienced as an adult. I don't even think people in my friendship circle, in my life, I don't think they really understand the impact of some of the things I've gone through in my adult life, because I just can't. It's like I can't talk. And I think that's just how, everyone responds to trauma differently, but just it's what I'm trying to say is that is a common response to trauma. Um, and it's also something that we see in students a lot. The lack of communication, or the inability to talk or be expressive with language, can often land students in trouble or in disciplinary action, or impacting grades negatively. And we need to be more mindful about how trauma does impact language, and how that can kind of have ripple effects throughout the child's personal and academic life if we're not mindful. So I was wondering if I could throw a question into the space, and if you all would like to engage and, just reflect on your thoughts. Um, what are some things that you've noticed about our institutions in society that can kind of unintentionally create an unsupportive environment for people, for survivors, for youth? Um, I can give an example of the workplace. There are certain things that I've experienced as a survivor in the workplace that I'm like, that's actually harmful, even though it's the way we've always done it. Um, Not necessarily at WEC, but just in institutions of work in general. So anyone can share.
Jennifer, that's the story you shared about people's response to seeing seeing graphic abuse in front of them,
Yeah.
and normalizing that. And that's like, I'm really stuck right now on what is happening at the federal government level, and the fact
Mhm.
that um, we have a child abuser in the top most powerful position in our country right now,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
that should be a deal breaker for his power. And I'm so worried that it's not going to be, because
Yeah.
we have seen in Worcester people um continue to hold on to power despite it being well known that they have harmed children, and there they are still in power. And the message that that sends to all of us, like, who were children, who have children, it, it leaves me like, that was powerful what you said too about the wordlessness of this,
Yeah.
and why it's really powerful to talk about it, because it, like, the trauma is the weapon of oppression. Like, we're clear about that at Worcester
Yeah.
addresses childhood trauma, and power is a necessary ingredient to be able to traumatize somebody. You have to have power over them. And
Yeah.
many of us, most of us, were in families where adults had power and we didn't, and that looked a certain way. And now we're still in these systems. And just as you said, as an adult in systems where I'm not the most powerful person in the structure, I've definitely been harmed for speaking up. And I know personally other people in this room right now are right there with me. Um, when you have power, you are often allowed to use your power to hurt people, and people, like, I don't know what you do about that. I don't it's
Yeah.
so, it's unfathomable. And sorry to talk so much about,
No,
like, I'm
I'm
just like,
soaking it all
oh
up.
my God,
Yeah.
Yeah,
God,
Um,
Amy, I know you just
else.
said, um, I don't know what we do about it. And Dr. Herring really asked us to think about where do we see it? And that recognizing where these systems and sometimes stigma or sometimes things that are normalized um come into play, like where we see these things, it helps us address it by recognizing it, right? I know in I was younger and I had a college experience, and there was a narrative around if alcohol was involved, then that like negated the experience, like it didn't
mhm.
happen
Mhm.
or something like that, and it somebody had to um share, like no, that's not true. That's not true at all, right? And so now I think in some spaces we start to see those narratives shifting, right? And maybe not. And maybe in some, I would imagine in some spaces, those narratives still remain, even though they're not true and they're harmful and toxic. But I know for me, when I learned that, it's like, oh, obviously that makes so much sense. But until somebody teaches you, you may not know. Or maybe
Mhm.
some people do know inherently, right? I don't,
Mm.
um, but I know in my case, I really needed the support to be like, oh, yeah, alcohol is a factor and it does change the dynamic. Um, but it means that consent is not possible, right? Because then we start a conversation around what consent looks like, um, and it really kind of shifts that it shifts how we move through societies and think about things when we have more knowledge and education. And so I appreciated the question a lot around where do we see it? Where do we run up against these harmful narratives and situations?
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. I mean, I think for me, one place where I see it, and it's not intentional at all, but culturally, so my family is originally from Haiti. And so if you know anything about Haitian culture, it's very conservative, which also means that there's also a lot of um, I don't want to say religiosity because I'm a woman of faith and I believe in God, but because I think that word has negative connotation. But just very rigid in our thinking and very like absolute in black and white. One of the things that resonate with me in my upbringing is that, obey no matter what, kind of like blind obedience, you don't question, and which I think was good for the era that I grew up in because it taught me respect for authority and it built character. And at the same time, I'm definitely seeing a shift in our culture and what the messaging is for children to say, you do what an adult tells you to do. Because I've already noticed that my kiddos have been in situations with grown-ups that are a little questionable, where I'm like, okay, well, what did they say? How did you respond? How did it make you feel? But if I had ingrained in them, of course, I teach them like respect for elders and all of that, and compliance just for their own safety. But this whole thing of like no matter who the adult is, do what they say or else, like that is a dangerous, for me, that is a dangerous message because I don't want my kids being complicit with things that are going to ultimately harm them just because of who the authority figure is that said it and how important or powerful they are. Like I do not message that with my kids. And so instead, what I like to do is balance, right? My son is very strong-willed. And so I give him the opportunity to process how he's feeling, what he's thinking, and so that he's not internalizing his consequences or discipline negatively, and we provide space for him to process. It wasn't something that I intended to do. I always thought I would raise my kids the way I was raised. But as I'm kind of absorbing the environment around me and I'm seeing what's happening in the world today, I'm like, whoa, I can't tell my kids to do whatever they're told, no matter who, because what if the wrong person tells them to do the wrong thing? And then, God forbid. So, my son's biggest thing is it doesn't even make sense. It's not even fair. And I'm thinking, you are literally born yesterday. You have no clue what you're talking about. But I at least give him the space to feel empowered to speak up because the next time he's in a situation that doesn't feel right, as long as it doesn't feel right, whether it's valid or not, he has language and tools to say, no, that I'm not doing that. And even if he gets in trouble for arguing back and forth, I'd rather him get in trouble for that than to be in a harmful situation, just blindly following just because a grown up told him to do XYZ. So that's just an example that I live by for my kids because they're good kids and they have that like eager to please personality. They're in that stage where they're wanting to impress mommy and daddy, wanting to impress their teachers, and I'm like, think critically. What are you being asked to do? Everything is not a let me impress you and do what you say moment. So,
Yeah, Jennifer, that made when you were talking about that, like you said, oh, maybe it was good that I was raised in the era of being obedient and compliant. But yeah, it was good for the adults. It's not like,
mm,
right? It
hmm
really was striking to me also how you talked about how church can really be a setup also, like the in multiple settings and multiple systems are telling kids they have no power, they have no agency, they will be rewarded for compliance and obedience.
yeah,
um, and wow, that's the exact setup for abuse to happen.
yeah. I'm just waiting to see if there are any unmute icons before I continue. Okay. So piggyback, and if anyone has any comments, you can feel free to unmute and interrupt me. I just can't see. I just want to make sure I am catching anyone else who wants to make comments. Um, so piggybacking off of what you just said, Amy, about, you know, compliance and reward. One of the, I think it's chapter 3, if I'm not mistaken, in my book, where I talk about current techniques for grooming. It doesn't necessarily look like I always use the Lifetime movie because that's like I grew up, the women in my family grew up watching Lifetime. So it's not like the creepy Lifetime movie situation where it's like you're getting lured in with a lollipop. It's like no, it's like much more um um intentional and like strategic than that. Um And so I just wanted to open up the space, and if people are not comfortable discussing, I totally understand that. But I think it's really valuable to discuss again where we see that happening in today's world and where we are normalizing either the blind obedience or the reward for a complete submission, and what that does over time, especially to young minds, is it creates this I say mush brain, but that's not what I mean to say. There's a more technical, sophisticated term I can use, but it's pretty much, I feel like we're producing this generation of people with this, we're so overwhelmed and inundated with COVID and the impact of COVID and just our own personal traumas and the economy. It's almost like your brain, there's no more space left in your brain to speak up and speak out. And so what you end up doing as a protective mechanism is just, again, obeying and just doing what you're told just to keep yourself safe and keep yourself out of the line of fire, which while you're doing that, the stage is being set and the environment is being primed for whatever harm will eventually come to human beings, which I guess I'm so attuned to that, because that's my lived experience and because I'm constantly thinking about it. Um, but I also would like to offer that, there's a lot of research out there about bystander theory and, how most people are not likely to speak up in a crisis or in a moment where someone is being caused harm and when harm is being caused. And so just an encouragement um, to folks on this call to do your best to be the one who stands up, speaks out, because our brains are at this point not even equipped to speak out because of all of the exhaustion from all of the world problems that we're dealing with, personal and collective. Well, we can't forget about the children. We can't forget about one another, and those who are typically on the other end of the most harmful behaviors and circumstances.
Jen, I was just going to say, when you did share your story, one of the things that you shared was that your mother immediately believed you and took
Mhm.
quick action to get you safe.
Mhm.
And you probably know this, but I do like to say it whenever possible. The research shows us that that is the most important predictor of how somebody is going to do, right?
Absolutely.
Kids that are believed by their caretakers and people that have power that immediately move to keep the kids safe, those kids have far better outcomes than kids who are not believed. And that is, to me, like, important for people to have in mind, because that usually is one of the things that we can impact, right? Like that, you kind of set that stage about thinking about these systems. And right, like if our
Yeah.
systems defaulted to believing victims
Mhm.
instead of protecting perpetrators, like everything would be different. But our default systems protect the power, not the person
Yes.
coming forward. And it's that really matters.
So a few things. The One of the questions that I was asked during my defense, my doctoral defense, was if I could extend my research, um, what would I talk about? And what I said was I would want to do a study on the biological mothers and their relationships with my participants, because 100% of my participants kind of deviated a little bit from my questions, my series of questions, because they felt they wanted to reflect on how their relationship with their mother either um, impacted their abuse or left them vulnerable to abuse. And so that was something that was really important to me, is to really support. One of the things I want to do to move this work forward, especially among students, is to really think critically and strategically about how we can put trusted adults in place for students to feel empowered, even if it's not a family member, so that they know. Because to your point, Amy, about research, you know, that is where healing begins, and relationships are key. Like any research, academic research about trauma, healing, it will tell you relationship building point person, safe space person. And so that's something that I would want to focus on. Additionally, you know, your point about protecting power is so powerful because one of the things that, and this could just be in my personal experience, one of the things that we forget when we're doing this work of, you know, supporting survivors of trauma is typically the perpetrators of trauma are very well connected. And not just well connected, but they're very charismatic. You know, male perpetrators in particular are they're just very handsome, very put together, very suave. And I'm not saying everybody, all men that are suave are abusers. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'll share a story. I actually shared this during my doctoral defense. The domestic violence shelter where I worked, there was a mom that I supported, and she was fleeing her home. Her husband was very abusive, and he was a firefighter, and he was very, I mean, just her situation was so challenging because everywhere she went for support, she hit roadblocks because he knew everyone. Not only did he know everyone, he had helped everyone. I mean, literally saved lives. Think about it. Like it, just like the imagery. Like I've never even, as I'm talking about it, I'm thinking, man, he must have saved like everyone's life that she tried to ask for help, right? So there was that. And then he was also very well connected with the local police department. And so I watched everything just kind of spiral and crumble right as it was happening because every call we made, there was a blockage based on her abuser's relationship with community stakeholders. And so just even thinking about, um, you know, I've been doing a lot of research on narcissism lately, and one of the things I keep hearing is how typically people, I'll say people with narcissistic personality disorder, because you know we can call anyone and anything narcissistic nowadays, but people who have narcissistic personality disorder, one of the markers of that is that they're able to um, like, for example, if I'm having a conversation with Amy, I'm having a conversation with Kelsey. Kelsey might be like, Jennifer is just insufferable. She's unbearable. I just, and Amy will be like, I have no clue what you're talking about. That is not my experience of her. And both perspectives be absolutely accurate, but because the person in question is just so strategic and pitting people against each other, what you now do is you isolate Kelsey because Amy and the rest of the city of Worcester experiences Jennifer as this wonderful, beautiful person. And Kelsey's like, am I crazy? Like she's not that wonderful. Like, but you know, we have to think about that as well, particularly around students, you know, students of all identities and backgrounds, right? Like how can the experience of being a survivor be isolating, right? We are empowered, we empower one another, but in the reality, thinking about the challenges that a person can face in trying to even utter, like, right, we talked about the language piece, we talked about how trauma impacts language centers in the brain, the labor that it takes to even utter what's been happening or your own lived experience with an individual or a group of people or an institution. It's you're adding trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. Um, Additionally, um, I don't know if everyone on this call is familiar with Kimberly Crenshaw's research, but she coined the theory of intersectionality. And initially, originally, it was meant to give some insight into the experiences of Black women, women of color in the workplace specifically. It was like a very niche theory. Then what happened is it ended up extending into additional racial and cultural backgrounds, folks with different varying abilities. It's just massive now, right? You can, any way that you identify, the theory says that there are multiple ways that a person can identify that intersect and that interact with institutions of power. And based on how you identify, your experience of those institutions of power may be more or less harmful than your neighbor or your counterpart, depending on what their identity markers are. In a nutshell, that is intersectionality. The theory that I propose in my research is that being a survivor of sexual trauma specifically should be considered an identity marker, because all of my participants in my study talked about their identity and their trauma being one and the same. And that actually was not the question. The question was, how has your identity impacted how you move about life based on the fact that you have experienced trauma, right? And they all said, well, I don't really know how to answer that question because the trauma happened when I was 5. So if a person was assaulted at the age of 5, they don't really know a life without being a sexual trauma survivor. So then that adds an additional identity marker among all the other ways that they identify as a human being. And so thinking about trauma, not the nature of trauma is so complex, and because of that, it creates complexity in the different markers of identity, if that makes sense. And so it's no longer about this demographic of people experience trauma worse than this. It's more so trauma impacts this demographic in different ways than maybe that demographic. So that's some of the learning that I had as well around the impact of trauma.
Jen, so much every single time you stop at the top, I'm like, there's so much we could unpack right there.
Oh,
But Heather,
oh, Heather's trying to raise her hand. Hi, Heather. I didn't see
yeah,
you.
Heather,
Hi.
go right.
Sorry.
That's okay. When you were talking about grooming earlier, I think a lot about how we expect students to act in schools right now. I hear a lot about active listening and whole body listening. And I know that that looks different for people with neurodivergence and all kinds of students that we have within our school system, especially in Worcester, and how we train our kids to not interrupt, to not make a commotion, to not be difficult, and that especially for kids with neurodivergence, and kids who are, have special needs or anything like that, that can look really different. Whole body listening, active listening, not disrupting, that might be the only time that they're able to bring something like that up. And so I think that we do scholars a disservice not allowing that in certain circumstances. Obviously, I know you can't do that all the time because it would be super disruptive and nobody would ever learn anything. And then I just also wanted to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying, Jen. Like, I was sexually abused by John Monfredo in the Worcester Public Schools for 3 years when I was a child. And I am still going through the trauma of reliving that every day, not just the abuse, but also the systemic barriers that were put in place to not let me access many of the things that I needed in order to sort of process that trauma. So 30 years later, I'm going through that trauma again, trying to get my files, trying to like show people that, as a child, I disclosed, I reached out for help. The people around me, like immediately close to me, believed me. I had therapists, I had people who helped me in that sense, but I was never even allowed to try to get any sense of justice. I'm not sure that our legal system gives any survivors of trauma actual justice, which is why I don't call it the justice system. But it lasts decades. It's not, and I don't want to say just because obviously nothing about this is just, but it's not just around when you disclose or when the abuse happens. It's forever. And yeah, that was my comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather, for sharing.
Thank you so much, Heather, for sharing. And that you have been publicly talking about what happened to you, and it's so powerful. And to watch how this man is still walking around in public. This man is not like he should be in jail. This man should not have any access to kids whatsoever. Yet look how broken our systems are. Not only did he have access, he had prestige. He was in a like one of the highest power positions in our city, and people knew what he did. And the complacency of the system is absolutely such a big piece of this. If we had the systems that gave people justice, that protected children, that valued children, everything would look different. And it's not lost on me that the harm done is lifelong harm. Is life. Trauma robs you of free choice around so many, like trauma takes so much from you. And it's just unconscionable to me that we've allowed children in our community to be victimized and have these perpetrators still walking among us, because it matters what to see people brought to justice for their crimes. I feel like that would really matter. And when you don't, when they get to keep on keeping on, how will you ever like feel safe in the world, in your community, in your body, when perpetrators are allowed to just keep on keeping on? It's so upsetting to me, as you can tell. Carmen, is that you? I see
Hi,
your
how you
hand.
doing?
Oh, hi, Carmen.
It's so nice to see all of you.
Good to see
The
you.
more I hear all of you talking, it's just this is a subject that really makes me so angry,
Yeah.
Heather, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I remember I was a school adjustment counselor for 30 years, Heather. I was working in Worcester Public School when that incident happened. But not only that, the people that was working in the administration at high levels, how they supported the person that was supposed to be paying for some of for the damage that it has done to Heather and who knows who else. But so exactly, as a person who was a school adjustment counselor for 30 years, and when I listened to Heather and you, Jennifer, because this is what we do, what we're doing to our kids. We are teaching them not really to say the things that they need to say. And it's so scary because wherever they go, when they go to church, it's the same thing. You're not supposed to say a thing, you need to listen to everybody. You're supposed to do what the adults are telling you to do. It's so scary. So how do we start, especially from our school system where they spend so many hours every day? What are some of the things that we need to do to make sure that, yes, it's okay to be, listen to your teachers, but that doesn't mean that you're supposed to be doing the things that they're asking you to do. How do we make that, make sure that they know the difference between one and the other?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really scary. Thank you, Heather, for sharing that. It's just you brought me back those years when that incident happened. So thank you for being so, to have the courage to share that with us. Thank you. I appreciate.
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to mind is advocacy. I'm one of the things that I love to study, and I'm really fascinated by, is groupthink, and how, typically when we're talking about survivors or people that are experiencing harm, the people that are experiencing the harm often outnumber the folks in power. And so it makes me think about, slave rebellion and, just things that movements, even like the Haitian Revolution, like things that have happened in history where the people were like, we are not taking this anymore. And it's just so powerful to see how long a group of people can go through an oppressive system and just sit and take it because of what the people in power represent. So I think, Carmen, to your question, the first thing that I would think about is advocacy. getting people together and on the same page and really moving the work forward in groups. I often think about even the work of Worcester Education Collaborative in general. Our work is very collaborative, and we believe that we cannot move any needle without the support and the backing of our community. And so that's one thing that comes to mind. The other thing that comes to mind is thinking about what are the ways in which we can start to advocate to shift infrastructure, to shift systems, right? Because the reality is laws and policy only exist and are maintained because of the people who lead other people, right? There's not this powerful structure that we can't break through to make change. The change is people deciding to build alliances to then further work or to decide to do something differently for the betterment of the people. So for me, my biggest answer to that question would be advocacy. Like, how do we get people on the same page about this being a problem, which I don't think anyone can argue that this is a social problem, and what are the changes that need to be made, starting within our schools, not just in our district necessarily, but just schools in general, the idea or the system of schooling. Schools have not changed since they were built in the industrial age. Like they've never changed. Like, and humans continue to evolve every 10 to 15 years. Our needs change, the way our brains are made up has changed. I mean, after COVID, I don't think anyone's brain is the same, but schools never changed the way we do things. And so how do we pinpoint those areas in school that are more flexible to change, right? And then using those little wins to build up to the bigger win of making our schools, our workplaces, our religious circles more trauma informed and trauma sensitive in how we do business.
Jen, Joanne Wagner put in the chat, and I think this is relevant to what you just asked us, what your thoughts are about sex ed curriculum, right? I know that has been an ongoing issue in Worcester. We've had
I
to
see it
really
now.
fight for people to get comprehensive sex ed. And of course, like that's going to contribute when kids don't even know that what's happening is wrong or they don't have the language to talk about it. They're much easier victims than when they have good
Yeah.
information about their own bodies. And that's, I think that's just such a good point around education is one of the tools we use to move the needle on this. And when we keep sex ed from kids, we're creating more victims. Like we are really creating a climate for kids to be victimized when they don't have any information about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And
Yeah, I think I agree that sex ed should be taught. I think that I would want to know more about who is teaching it. Um, what are the experiences of the folks teaching it? I think I would put sex ed in that bucket of things that need to shift systemically in our schools. Because the other group that I haven't brought in yet to this conversation is our multilingual learners. So folks that are coming in from overseas have different values and thoughts about sex ed, and even having conversations with their children before a certain time, right? And if we're being trauma informed, then that means we're valuing what all of humanity has, when it comes to their own values around sex and sex ed. So we have to honor that too. So I'm trying to be careful how I answer it. I do think it's important work that needs to happen, especially where it's intended to decrease the potential for harm in the long run. And I've been in some sex ed classes where I'm like, are they allowed to say this to kids? Depending on who the teacher is, depending on the values of the teacher, you know. So I definitely think it needs to happen. I think there need to be systems of accountability in place to make sure we're monitoring what's being said, how the content is being delivered. Because truth be told, when you're talking about sex ed to young students, depending on who the teacher is, if that person is not sound in their mind, that could open up students to questionable conversation and questionable interactions with the students as well. So it's a very, I can see both sides of the issue because it's a very touchy subject. But I would say, considering the values of the families, values of the student, youth culture, and then who is the adult delivering the curriculum, and then who built the curriculum? Is it culturally sensitive? Is it trauma informed? So there's so much that needs to shift in our schools, and I think sex ed is a great example of that.
Jennifer, I have a question in regards to education, particularly sexual education, but it could be other topics as well. What are your thoughts on peer educators in the schools? I think Planned Parenthood was doing that. I don't know if they're still doing that, but having kind of, you know, leaders within the school kind of be a resource for their fellow students. I was just wondering what you've seen or whether or not you've seen that work.
I have not seen that in practice, to be honest, as much as I probably should. But I think in theory, that's a great idea. Again, I think that typically when we, as educators in general, when we implement new initiatives, we think about the initiative itself and we're not always mindful of the unintended consequences of the outcomes or the results, right? And so I think as long as it's trauma informed, culturally responsive, and there are checks and balances, I think that that has the potential to be really powerful and impactful across the school for youth. I saw someone else with a hand up. Oh my goodness, I think it was a J name, maybe.
Anyone can feel free to jump in. Please join the conversation. Cindy, I know you had put some important stuff in the chat. If you wouldn't mind speaking up about that, that would be great. And if it's hard to find the raise hand thing, we're cool with you just unmuting.
Yeah, just shout out.
No worries. Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Rapella. I
Hi.
work for the Trauma Intervention Services team at Wayside Youth and Family Support Network in Milford. In listening to this conversation, and this is my first time in this training series, so I apologize if maybe I'm not bringing this resource in the correct space, but
No, it's okay.
I'm hearing people interested in doing advocacy for sexual assault survivors and also tapping into existing resources for education and prevention. And so as part of the trauma program, we are considered what's called a rape crisis center. And so we're part of the state coalition of providers of domestic and sexual violence in the state of Massachusetts. The state coalition is Jane Doe Inc. I dropped the link in the chat. They do a lot of advocacy efforts at the state level and even local levels, and they have a specific legal advocacy team that does a lot of advising and consulting for local legal advocacy on these matters. Also, each of our towns in Massachusetts, we have a designated rape crisis center that not only is supposed to offer 24-hour helpline services and counseling and accompaniment to the hospital, but also community outreach and education. And so, not sure if anybody here in the Worcester area has worked with Pathways for Change, but they are the organization assigned to the Worcester area. I'd recommend reaching out to them as a liaison for outreach and education, because we often go to school environments to train the teachers or do trainings in capacity building with the students, peer support training, things like that. And we get the funding for that. And 25% of any rape crisis center funding in the country is supposed to be used for community outreach and education. So I'm not saying that it's a seamless, simple solution, but
Yeah.
wanted to highlight those resources in case that can be a place to start or a low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you so
and
much. I definitely appreciate you sharing that, Cindy. I would love to connect with you offline as well.
yeah, and I can connect you with my supervisor, Jean Squares, because she's kind of represents our program. But the other thing I wanted to say too about building relationships with your local rape crisis centers is that um, we our confidentiality policies have a higher standard. And
Mm,
so even if at the school level you have Title IX coordinators and technically everybody's supposed to be a safe space for the students, it's important to recognize that at the student school level, because of Title IX regulations, school staff has to is required to take kind of like a neutral approach, and that's why they use language like complainant and respondent as opposed to survivor and abuser. Because both parties have Title IX protections. And so building relationship with the Rape Crisis Center can help so that we can connect students in their support system, even their teachers or their parents in a neutral space that won't have that presumption of neutrality that sometimes schools are obligated by federal law to undertake. Um, I know I used to go to Framingham State University as a satellite counselor, and that was really helpful because even if they have a Title IX coordinator and student services program, when you talk to a rape crisis counselor, you don't have to worry about kind of like the Title IX regulations that staff are mandated to in federally funded schools and school settings. So sometimes that can make people feel like we are a safer space or a affirming, validating space, if that makes sense. But thank you for bringing this topic, and I think that's it.
thank you for sharing.
Yeah, we're so glad you're here.
And also shout out to Pathways because they have the only deaf survivor program in the state of Massachusetts. So not only they're experts in the field of sexual violence, but specifically culturally and language specific services for the deaf community. Um, so they're a huge resource for that too.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to jump in and share or reflect on our conversation so far?
I don't know where to go with this, but I feel like compelled to say it, that the kids, kids are hearing people on TV say that a 5-year-old is not a 15-year-old. And that is horrifying to me. And I am wondering, we try to protect our kids, but they're going to hear that and they're going to pass it around. And I don't know. I don't know what, in individual families, I guess, parents can address it with their kids, but it just creates such a hostile, a more hostile environment for, um, female children who are now being told, well, if you're 15, you're not really a child.
Thank you for sharing that. We actually were discussing that briefly right before the call started. And that's part of the reason why I decided to kind of pivot my plan, because as the work that I do every day continues to shift and pivot every like 2 weeks on average so far, it's amazing how our country gets hit with these statements or these, mindsets that should cause us to stop and think, what do we need to do differently and how, and what are the steps that we need to take? Um, I can say that for Worcester Education Collaborative specifically, we are working on planning a conference in the spring where we're getting folks who are survivors, folks that work with survivors together, and thinking about the impact of trauma on learning, kind of expanding that conversation. Um, and also thinking about opportunities for advocacy. So for me, that's my small way of at least starting the conversation and getting the folks in the room that are doing similar work to really start that work in Worcester because it's so important. And I think that from what Cindy shared, it sounded like there's a lot of awesome work happening already. And unfortunately, because of the gravity of the need, um, I would love to see us as a city come together and really address it from multiple angles and from in multiple different ways, because it's not going to stop being a problem, unfortunately. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit and give folks maybe a 5-minute break, and we can come back at 1:11 to have a little bit of a Q&A. And if folks want to go into breakout rooms and chat, I'm okay with that. But I want to give folks some time to digest what we've talked about, what we've heard, take a quick break, and then we'll come back at 1:11. Actually, it's 1:05 now. Do you want to say 10 minutes or 5? What do you think? 10? We'll come back at 1:15.
Okay. All right. Thank you for giving us a little break. It's really heavy content, and I hope everyone's hanging in there and doing all right. I know that it's really heavy content, and people in this audience are impacted by it.
Yeah.
And we were, Jennifer, you and I were talking earlier about like just what it even takes to talk about, to think about this topic when it does impact you. And I feel like I don't know, you have to have some pretty great skills. And I know for me, being academic about it a lot of times is a way to give myself just a little bit of space from the sort of feeling content and the thinking content, right?
Right,
Because
right.
it's and you really brought it home about how much being an abuse survivor becomes your identity. It impacts every aspect of your identity, and that means it's hitting at a developmental level, an academic level, a feeling level, a spiritual level. Like we
Mhm.
are whole people, and experiences of powerlessness and trauma and harm shape who we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Something that comes to mind as you're talking too is just about, again, the grooming culture, and how unfortunately what ends up happening in those spaces is most people don't realize what's happened until it's too late or until you've already been conditioned, um, which is something that I'm thinking about. How can I use my positionality to help disrupt that culture of kind of having people kind of maintain the status quo, for lack of a better word. And while you're maintaining that, there are nefarious things happening in the background, but no one thinks to question it because on average, thinking about groupthink, right? Our brains are not usually built to be the one lone person who stands up for justice. Most of us are kind of wired to just go with the flow, especially if you're picking up on something harmful that's happening. It becomes less about going with the flow and more so of a protective measure for yourself. So either way, there's an incentive to keeping your mouth shut, is how I can say it best.
Yeah, lots of incentives to stay quiet and nothing tangible to report when you're talking about grooming, right? There's nothing tangible, no, like, or there may be, right? If you
Yep,
have
yep.
right listening ears, they're going to hear it. But
Mhm.
as a child or a young person, it's really hard to even articulate what that is because nothing happened yet,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. That
It's
is
that
so
bad
powerful.
feeling. And so
Yeah.
how do you, or maybe you don't even recognize the bad feeling because, right? So if the folks that recognize it stay quiet because that's in their best interest to protect themselves, and the folks that don't recognize it because they don't have language to even share that that's what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And at so many powerful points, it makes me think about when you talk about identifying it. I was recently on Instagram and I wish I could remember her name. I can find it and share it later, but it's an African American woman. I think she's a medical doctor, and she was on a business trip. And she was in her hotel, and she had posted a video where this man came in and was trying to force his way into her room. And she's got the latch up, but he was like literally kept saying, "No, I just want to replace your toilet paper. I'm just here to clean your bathroom." And she's like, "No, I don't want you to come in." And he's literally forcing himself in her room. And so thankfully he never got in. But she shared after the fact that she went down to the hotel staff to share with them what happened. And they're like, there's nobody here by that name. He doesn't work here. And so they opened up this big investigation. And, she shared that, she thankfully felt supported. But one of the things that she shared that was so powerful was that, she's like, "I am an educated woman. I'm a professional. I know what I saw. I know what I experienced." But she shared that every time she retold the story, you would think she would get re-traumatized because that's, in my training, that's what we're taught, right? Especially in DV. Don't have the client have to keep repeating themselves. Make sure your systems are tight. Don't put them through the trauma of having to keep repeating what happened, right? So that's how I'm like, yeah, you're probably being re-traumatized. That's not what her experience was. What she actually said was the more she told the story, the more she started to second guess herself and say, wait, he wasn't really trying to push into the room. Like, he just was trying to help. Did I did I make sure to tell him I didn't want him to come in the room? Like, she started gaslighting herself. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is so powerful. Um, it just goes to show that even when you do have language, if you're the minority and you're the only one who didn't want to just comply and be like the cute and mute, whatever, just to keep yourself safe, you're just like, oh, maybe it didn't happen that way. And so then you end up wasting time questioning your own lived experience while whoever perpetrated the harm is going to the next one and the next one and the next one, and nothing gets done because it's just so heavy of an experience that it takes so much unpacking that by the time you unpack for yourself, other people are experiencing similar harm. But then where does the advocacy and the systems and the accountability come into place? Typically, it's that one lone ranger that's, kind of usually the disruptor or the black sheep or whatever you want to call that person. Usually it's that person that ends up having to continually harm themselves in speaking up and speaking out because groupthink says, well, I didn't see it, I didn't hear it, or I saw it and I heard it, but I'm just going to keep myself safe and just go along with the flow. I think Barbara had a comment. Oh,
Go ahead,
Barbara
Barb.
says, Heather, oh, go ahead, Amy.
Barbara is unmuted, ready to talk.
Oh, go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, I'm unmuted, right?
Yep.
Okay. I don't think that I quite put that in there properly.
Yeah, I read it. Yeah.
Yeah. Heather wants everybody to know that Stand with Heather is taking place this Thursday at 5:30 at City Hall, which is the time of school committee meeting, and that she's on her Instagram account that's Stand with Heather. She gives information on item GB3-244 regarding Worcester Public Schools volunteer screening policy. And I would just like to, if I could, take a minute to talk about what that is and the huge implication of it in terms of safety in Worcester Public Schools, and also in terms of what we've been talking about here today about powerful systems shielding perpetrators rather than protecting victims. And Worcester is really a textbook case for that. So what happened is that, as Heather had reported earlier, John Manfredo was allowed after a substantiated 51A back in the 1990s, after he had sexually abused and assaulted her from ages 9 to 12, to return to the Worcester Public Schools as a principal, and then served on Worcester School Committee for a long while. Last year, he was allowed into the schools to read to a group of children, and many parents spoke up about it. And that has put into question Worcester's volunteer policy, which currently involves getting, as far as we know, in the research that Heather has done, getting a query completed, which if you haven't been prosecuted, even if you have charges on a 51A that's been substantiated, you can get cleared. So she has talking points for she has talking points in there for making a more robust policy by having SORI, sexual offender registries, also involved both statewide and nationally, since so many people come in from out of state. But the larger issue is the shielding by powerful people who sit there right now, Mayor Petty and Maureen Benenda, and also Diana Brancheria. After Heather came forward recently with a video about candidates who have shielded Manfredo, Maureen Benenda, after she, at her watch party, took a photo with John Manfredo standing right behind her. So the message is really that, you know, the people who have been the victims really don't matter. It's the perpetrators who are shielded that mattered and are still continuing their harm. I also want to mention that Mayor Petty endorsed both Maureen Benenda and Diane Brancheria. So sitting right there at Worcester School Committee is the system that helped to shield John Manfredo. And it is beyond, it's gone on for decades. And so if you can make it to school committee, and at least if you would just perhaps just take the time to read Heather's story and points about the policy. One piece of the policy is obviously there's concern that it could be overutilized, and people who are safe to come into the schools who maybe have the 51A for child neglect because of circumstances like, poverty or homeless or whatever, and are perfectly safe to come in and to be with their children, there would need to be a appeals process. So right now it's just standing that there'll be a query, and that they're adding in that the superintendent would have the ability to prevent somebody from coming in to read to children. So I just wanted to mention that because it's right here, it's right in Worcester, and it's continued for decades. And Heather is incredibly brave to come forward with her story. And I think, Jennifer, like you talked about, the need for people to come together. There's way more. There's power that's generating just from Heather coming to this and Heather going into other spaces and using her voice, and lots of other people supporting her now and coming forward to help with this. So thank you for the space.
Thank you so much for sharing, Barbara. Would anyone else like to share?
I was
Would
going to, when you were
Go.
talking about the Instagram post of like gaslighting yourself and sort of self-doubt, that one of the things that does so often happen when people come forward is that I think in general, we have such a discomfort with the idea that people can be victimized that we want to invalidate their experience. I know times that I've been harmed, even people I know that I care about that are friends of mine said things like, come on, you must have done something. You must have had some role in it. Like, what was your part in it? And that, I think, is a really common experience. And if you're not hearing that from other people, you're playing that to yourself. Like, what did I do? What could, right? Like, what could I have done? And that's, having worked in child welfare, small toddlers are like blaming themselves for the ways that adults victimize them. And that to me is such a big piece, and an important part is the shame that comes along with it. When you're a victim, you did nothing, yet you still are faced with like that doubt, that questioning yourself, that feeling like I must have, what did I do? Why me? And that is so, so harmful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy. Karen?
Hello. Yeah,
Hi,
I just was, hello.
Karen.
I was thinking when Amy was talking, like that's such an important piece of change, like a systems response. And we've seen this in Worcester a lot too. So an example could be, could be Heather's, or it could be like the Nikki Bell stuff we saw in the news, or things like where a systems response is prove it. Or like the police, the DOJ, like prove it, that didn't happen. There's, we want to see more evidence. Where another system response can be like we heard recently, like about the safety concern or the incident of violence at the Worcester Public Library. The library wasn't like, prove that happened. Like they were just like, oh, geez, people aren't feeling safe here. What are we going to do about it? Like I just think that that's such a culture shift of a system that we can try to do better at, is like not, I mean, people are getting sued and it is people's lives, so I understand, but there's got to be a balance of like, how much do we need to dig in about, especially sexual violence and things like that? Like, let's just move on and create safe spaces.
Yeah.
Such a great point, Karen. Thank you so much. Right? The default is always the victim is blamed. The victim is responsible for making the case. Our default is always to just go right on that side of power. And,
Right.
we don't want them to be falsely, their life will be wrecked with a false accusation. What about the life of the victim?
Yep. One thing that comes to mind while we're talking about the kind of the self-gaslighting, and thank you, Karen, that was really powerful share. So going back to development, right? When trauma happens in development, in some cases, most cases, there's kind of a delay, right, in growth psychologically, emotionally, intellectually. And so when we, sometimes we tell each other or our children, whatever you tell yourself or your child, that's going to become their inner voice. And what I've realized when we were talking about, how you think to yourself, well, what did I do wrong? It just makes me think, how many times has a person experiencing harm been blamed for what happened, or been told, what did you do wrong, or you didn't see it that way, or that's not how it happened? it almost like it's almost like you're pouring salt on the wound. That's the only image that I can think of, where it's like you're very vulnerable, and you're in a crisis state, and instead of providing words of uplifting words, encouragement, like allyship, it's all about what you did wrong. So imagine how much further it kind of discourages the person who's been harmed to come out, not just about that situation, but then moving forward. And then imagine what that person must be going through as a bystander to say, well, am I credible? Like, am I credible enough to stand up for this person? Because, I don't even know if I saw the thing that I said I saw, right? And so it's really important when we're thinking about language and how trauma impacts our use of language and our ability to communicate and perceive clearly and justly, is really important as well. I'm just reading Scarlett's comment. Yeah.
Scarlett, do you want to jump in? If you don't mind, what you have to say is really important and really powerful.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I'm ready for it, but I have a friend who died because of violence. Her ex-husband killed her. And after that, I started studying about it and everything. And I think it's not worth to express all, all the conflicts inside them the victim is going through.
Yeah.
It's really sad. And I feel sorry sometimes because I couldn't be there to help her, but this happened, and then we need to take care of ourselves when we in that situation, when we are the victims.
Absolutely. Scarlett, I'm so sorry to hear about your loss, and thank you so much for sharing. And you and everyone involved are in my thoughts and prayers. I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And it happens way, way too often.
Yes, it is. Every single day.
Mm-hmm. Cindy, is this an old hand raise or is this a new one?
Hi, this is a new one.
Hi.
Scarlett, thank you for sharing your story and your friend's story. And for what it's worth, the Trauma Intervention Services team here at Wayside, we have a homicide bereavement program for survivors and supporters and family members or friends of those who died due to domestic violence, homicide. So if you're interested in talking to somebody about it, be happy to share our information with you, or I can just put it in the chat for everyone. But I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the conversation about rape culture that we're having. It's also very difficult to know in this day and age what we can and what we cannot say, especially in spaces where we come together as agencies from federally funded programs. And what I can say about all of that is I'm really glad that at least here at the Wayside level, we have a training coming up on the language to use, because I feel like the latest federal guidance on banned language very much supports that rape culture that we're talking about here, and even kind of bans words like survivor and victim, which feels very disempowering. And given that we're being led by someone that's on tape admitting to sexually abusing women. It's very tough for anybody to not feel like they don't know if they should be speaking up or if they should be saying something or not saying something. So even just having conversations about accessing training and updating our language in a way that can still feel empowering, it's really important. And I appreciate the space for that and like the bravery that everyone is having right now to talk about this conversation, even in this climate. So I don't know if in your organizations you have access to training or support in terms of language that we can be using to still let people know that they're being supported and welcome in spaces, even if we have a whole new list of banned words. But I just wanted to chime in and just say that if that's not something in our radar, I definitely encourage everyone to like reach out for training about that, either within your organization. I know at Wayside, we're very lucky to count with Aliyah and her leadership, and we're going to have guidance on that coming up. Just because we get all this list of banned words and language that very much supports rape culture, it doesn't mean that we can't use our voice. We just have to come up with new or creative ways to do it. But going back to Scarlett and Heather and just in general to echo survivors' voices, I think a place to start is just believing survivors and just offering a space to listen. And I think sometimes at the school setting, that's really hard because teachers have to stay focused on the academics and the curriculum and all of that. So just even just remembering the value of that humanity and believing is powerful. And for those of you who kind of have brought up the difficulties of people being believed in the difficulties of the investigative process and the court process and the approaches that our society has about like investigating and not believing right away. Even if at the court level or systemic level, there is this whole process that we have to follow due to constitutional rights. Don't ever forget the power of believing somebody and you letting them know that you believe them. And I feel like organizationally, we all have different guidelines on how we can communicate to someone that we believe them. But even just letting them know that you believe them and that if you have to follow protocols, it's just more like an organizational thing. I think that can go a really long way. And then remembering to connect people with someone neutral, because even if maybe at the court level or school level, they don't feel that avenue that they want, there are still other places like through rape crisis centers and trained counselors where they can have that safe space to talk. I would say in our program, 99% of cases don't go through the court system. And out of the 1% of cases that go through the court system, very, very few, if barely any, goes through the whole court process, from restraining order, filing police report, going to court for a trial, etc. Because that process is so taxing, so taxing on survivors. And so what we do is we try to like help people feel like that's not their only option for a sense of justice, and that even if that takes time or even if court outcomes don't go the way they're hoping for, that they have support. and that they can also think about envisioning justice in their own terms. Because for a lot of people, especially people of color and immigrants, even justice system involvement is not something that fits their definition of justice, especially if it risks deportation, if it risks being exposed to police violence and brutality, you know. So yeah, I just wanted to encourage everyone to like express to survivors that, you know, that you believe them, and like if you cannot be someone that can adopt a neutral position or a position of belief right away, like remember that you can still refer them to someone that can, and that goes a long way. I know I saw Virginia here. I don't know if you're still here, Virginia, but she's one of our trained trauma counselors in the trauma team. And we go through 40 hours of pre-service training with our volunteers and our staff for this. And the conversations we're having here are like the conversations we have in our pre-service training for 40 hours, you know? So I'm not bringing this up to say, oh, now we all need to go through a 40-hour training. But to just give the group credit for just making space for these conversations, because typically I've only had them in the pre-service training spaces with our volunteers and our staff. And it's good to be in a space with other providers that are allowing space for this type of conversation.
Thank you. I'd like to take the last few minutes of this workshop to really give folks a chance to reflect on maybe something that you're hopeful for as far as the work of supporting survivors of trauma, any opportunities you see in your community, any ideas that you have, or just forward thinking about the potential to make systemic change and support all survivors. I'll give you all a couple minutes to think about what you want to share if you're comfortable sharing, and then I'll model by going first. Okay, so one thing that I'm really excited about moving forward is the partnerships and the relationships that I've built so far in this role. And I'm excited about how many people are really invested, both personally and professionally, in the work of healing and supporting folks who've experienced trauma. And just excited about potential collaboration in the near future. Anyone can jump in.
I appreciate that you're bringing us around to, a more positive and collective impact, um, and that's so helpful. It really is beautiful to recognize that we can create space for people to talk about the really painful, difficult things that have happened and continue to happen um, in our community, in our culture, in our country. Um, and I feel hopeful reminding myself that these things have always been happening. This behavior is not new. Perpetrating is not new. But now we have systems of communication to connect with each other and to build power. The experience of being a victim is so isolating, and you do feel like you're the only one. It's on you, and you look at how people are responding. But we're also seeing victims come together to demand justice. And even in this space, all of us are here because we see the harm and we're not okay with it. And it scares me to see how this will go down with what's going on in our government with our perpetrator in chief. That scares me, but I also feel some hope that we're in space where people are speaking up against it, and we have to just have each other's backs. And I feel like we can, and we do, and that's so helpful.
Thanks for that, Amy.
I'll just add that it's hard to find something positive about what's going on with Epstein and all that. But I am just in awe of the strength of the women who are standing together at the microphone with pictures of themselves as children. I just have, it feels good that I want to support them, but it also feels I get some strength from it, seeing them stand up. And the whole idea of Me Too, like you said, Jennifer, that there's so many more victims than there are perpetrators. And so when the victims unite, it's so powerful.
Thank you, Susan.
I'm reflecting a little bit on the power of like media and news reporting and things like that to put this information into a public sphere. So it's like publicly recorded, and in some of the situations we've referenced today, people can look back and say, and this person protected the perpetrator, and this one did, and this one did, because the evidence was there and it was documented and we can see it, because that helps counterbalance the gaslighting that happens, even the self-gaslighting in that example. I know folks talked about that someone mentioned the DOJ report, and I remember sitting at a table and I still question. I was sitting there and I heard that cop say that. So why are the police acting like they didn't know? This was years before, right? And I was sitting at the table and the cop said, "Oh yeah, we do that." Right? Like it wasn't a secret, it wasn't, but we didn't make a media report at that time, right? And so then I don't have the record, right? And we didn't have a DOJ report to stamp with it, right? Like these things happen slowly over time. And so yeah, just I'm thinking about the power of like written records or verbal records, and to help with those internal conversations and the systems for longevity, even if we don't see immediate results. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we can take one more before we close. Hey, well, thank you again so much for having me. Um, I really enjoyed myself these past 2 sessions, and I hope that we have more opportunities to discuss and collaborate and just learn from one another. Um, Amy has my contact information, and I'm happy to connect with any of you all online, offline, and just keep the conversation going. So thank you, thank you, thank you for attending, for your support, your participation, and I hope to see you again soon.
Jen, are there any other ways that people can engage with you or with WEC? And doesn't WEC have a big event coming up?
We our Bassett Symposium is coming up next Monday. Thank you, Amy. Next Monday at the Beechwood Hotel at 5 p.m. Tickets are free, so please come with a friend or a family member. We're going to have our keynote speaker, Kwame Kese. He is the CEO of Harlem Children's Zone, and so we're excited to have him as our keynote. Yeah, please come. I can share the registration information with Amy if you're interested in attending.
That would be great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. This was a really powerful, really challenging, but really powerful conversation. And it's just so nice to feel like we can be together and talk about this really hard stuff and support each other. And that's how things change. I really appreciate you, Jennifer, and your work is powerful and important. And the fact that you're out here doing it is a beacon of hope.
Thank you. I appreciate you all as well.
All right. And we will have the recording up soon on our website, worcesteracts.org. And yeah, please feel free to revisit it whenever you want and share it out. And we will do our best to put all the great resources that people listed on the website as well. That's what we like to do, is have a sort of one stop place where you can find all of the stuff you're looking for.
And
Great.
Amy, I've just added to the chat the feedback form. We
good.
request that folks take just a minute here. It doesn't even take a minute, 30 seconds or so, to give us some quick feedback. That helps inform Worcester Acts programming and helps us share back with our funders. Thanks.
Oh, Kelsey, thank you. I can see you did like the here. You can sign up for our mailing list and all of that. So great. Thanks so much to everybody. Thanks too for the wayside information, was really helpful as well. Thank you.